History taught you about the Vikings, a people who came from the sea to burn and steal. But here's what they never taught you in school. They didn't just raid, they ended a world. June 8th, 793. The monks of Lindisfarne heard the sails before they saw them. Lindisfarne was no ordinary monastery. It sat on a small island off the northeast coast of England, a place so holy that kings were buried in its shadow. For 150 years, the monks there had copied the Gospels onto pages of golden ink. They had guarded the bones of St. Cuthbert. It was the closest thing Northern Europe had to a fortress of heaven. And on that morning, the sea brought hell. The long ships came without warning. No declaration, no cause. The men who stepped onto the beach carried axes and wore the cold of the north in their eyes. They found the monks in the chapel and cut them down where they knelt. Some they drowned in the surf, others they dragged to the boats in chains, sold into slavery across the water. When word reached the rest of Christendom, a scholar named Alcuin wrote that the heathens had poured out the blood of saints around the altar and trampled their bodies, his words, like dung in the street. Think about that. The holiest place in northern England, dung in the street. But here's where it gets darker. Lindisfarne wasn't the first raid. It was the first one the world believed. For years, smaller Norse crews had hit isolated villages and vanished into the fog. Nobody wrote those down. Lindisfarne mattered because it was the proof that nowhere was safe, not even God's own house. And the reason why changes everything you thought you knew about the Vikings. Those first raiders didn't come for land. They came because the North was hungry, and the monasteries of Britain were rich, and they had learned one thing: the people who owned the gold could not defend it. So they came back, year after year, deeper each time. And the raid that came next would teach an entire continent to pay them to leave. Now forget everything you just learned about raiders who hid and ran. By 845, the Vikings weren't testing the water. They were coming for the capital of an empire, Paris. The year 845. The Frankish kingdom was the most powerful state in Western Europe, the heir to Charlemagne's empire, the shield of Christendom. And up the river Seine came a fleet that blotted out the water. The sagas name the man at the front, Ragnar, the same Ragnar from legends. Whatever the truth of the man himself, the number of ships was real, more than 100, carrying thousands of warriors straight toward the heart of Frankish power. King Charles the Bald did what kings do. He gathered his army and split it across the two banks of the river. He was going to trap them. It was a mistake. The Vikings fell on one half of the army first, while the other half stood watching from across the water, unable to help. The Franks who could not escape were hanged, every one of them. The sagas put the number at more than 100, and their bodies were left hanging where the king could see them. Paris fell. The Vikings took the city and everything inside it. And then Charles did something that would echo for centuries. He paid them 7,000 pounds of silver, the first great Danegeld, a ransom for his own capital. Fill the boats with silver and the Vikings would go away. It worked, that time. But here's what matters. Charles didn't end the raids, he priced them. Every Viking crew in the north heard the same message. The richest kingdom in Europe will pay you to leave. And the raids didn't stop, they got bigger. Why wouldn't they? The king had just told them what his city was worth. Think about that for a second. The man who was supposed to protect Christendom taught an entire culture that violence pays. And the final piece history books skip is the strangest one. Some of the men who took that silver never made it home. A sickness tore through their camp that summer, and the Frankish chroniclers called it the judgment of God. Maybe. Or maybe it was just the price of breathing in a city full of the dead. Either way, the lesson had already spread. And the next time the Vikings came to England, they didn't come to be paid. They came to stay. This is the part of the story you were never taught. Because the third raid isn't a raid at all. The year is 865. And this time the Vikings don't come in longships. They come in an army. The English called it the Great Heathen Army. The Norse called it something simpler. It was thousands of warriors, the largest force the North had ever sent south, and it landed in East Anglia, and it did not leave. Within a year, it had taken York, the old capital of Northumbria, and the Vikings didn't burn it and sail home. They renamed it Jorvik. They moved their families in. They made it their own. And then they found the king, Ella, king of Northumbria, the same Alla who, the sagas claim, had once thrown the Viking leader Ragnar into a pit of snakes and watched him die. The sons of Ragnar had come back for him. That, at least, is the story. What happened next is the single most brutal detail in this entire history, and it comes with a warning because the sagas wrote it down and historians still argue whether it ever truly happened. They called it the Blood Eagle. The victim was pinned face down. His ribs were cut from the spine and pulled open, like the wings of a bird, and his lungs were drawn out through the wound. The sagas say Alla died this way, that Ragnar's sons carved the eagle into his back as an offering to Odin. Whether the blood eagle was real or a story told to terrify, it worked. Because here's what matters. The Vikings did not leave. That army stayed and settled and married and ruled. The land they took became the Danelaw, a third of England governed by Norse law, with its own language and its own kings. York became the richest trading city in the north. And the final piece history books skip is this. The Vikings who came to conquer did not stay Vikings. Within 2 generations, the grandchildren of the raiders were speaking the language of the people their grandfathers had slaughtered. They were farming the same fields. They were being buried under the same churches. The sea raiders who had ended a world on Lindisfarne became the farmers of a new one. Same blood, completely different destiny. History taught you the Vikings came from the sea to burn and steal. But here's what they never taught you in school. 3 raids. The first ended a world. The second taught a continent to pay for its own fear. And the third wasn't a raid at all. It was a birth. The men who rowed those long ships didn't just destroy an age. They became part of the next one. If these hidden Viking facts blew your mind, hit the like button and subscribe. It would really help this channel as we uncover the warrior cultures they erased from history.